source, transport, and response. So stage 0 is only going to apply to the response or depositional reaches. So it won't apply at all to the transport valley types, which is, if you think of Lane's balance is basically what comes in is what goes out. And compare that with the response valley types, which are net sediment sinks. And so these are our broad valleys. So anything with a floodplain basically is a response valley type. And so there's a ton of really good old literature out there, but one for kind of a local context. This is from Jim Siddell and I forget Froggett's first name right now. But anyway, this is from 1984, and just looking at the Mackenzie River, the Willamette River, from the confluence with the Mackenzie up to about Harrisburg. I think this is about a 20-mile stretch, and just a nice little map showing the change in the river in really current era. And they kind of line out how this came about, and they include a lot of the Department of War records on how much wood was extracted from these river channels to kind of convert this to a single thread river and allow navigation. And just a real quick summary, they took out over 69,000 trees just in this segment alone, and the average diameter was 0.5 meter. So a tremendous amount of wood volume came out of these that increased the efficiency of the river and let it in size and channelized. And I won't read that conclusion for you, but I think it's a really excellent one, written 36 years ago, basically describes the stage 0 condition very, very well. So I just thought it was a really great reference, that's a little bit older. Sorry about that. So if we're going to look at a river or a piece of stream to work on, how do we evaluate it and look at it for restoration potential? And the classic approach has been to think about rivers, again, in Lane's balance kind of context. What goes in is what goes out. And I think most people in the classic approach would look at this river system and, just like the folks that were here before us, try to stabilize this eroding bank. Eroding banks are bad, right? Try to put some log jams in there to provide cover for fish and create pools. But it's really at a habitat scale that you're looking at this river, rather than, describing it like Leopold did and thinking about the valley as the river. And it shouldn't be just a channelized ditch. So there's a lot of background. If you guys want more, I can kind of go into more of the introductory stuff that gets us to this point. So here's what that same body of water looks like in the river. And since you guys are all from the Northwest, you're all pretty familiar with this. It starts to rain pretty good, and all of our rivers are very efficient transport flumes. And they've been deliberately transitioned into this condition from what should be a depositional environment and very much a losing net sediment sink. So to go through the tool real quick, this is that same system we were just looking at. So it flows from the bottom corner here to the northwest. This is Staley Creek, and it flows into the middle fork of the Willamette River right up here. And so a major kind of fundamental thing about the stage 0 design that we do is knowing what our geomorphic control is. The thing that sets up the valley that forms over a long period of time. So for this particular example, the middle fork Willamette confluence, this is a much larger, more dominant trunk line, and the elevation of this dictates and sets the elevation of this system that's coming into it. So what we're going to do first is simply run a profile of the bare earth LiDAR, not of the current channel, anything like that, but just a valley center line. And so when you go into the toolbox, if you have it, the first couple steps are kind of just some real simple housekeeping things to make sure your files are organized in the correct locations. And then you're going to just name what your center line is going to be called. And if you guys don't want me to kind of go through this minutia detail, go ahead and let me know, and I'll skip ahead into some of the other steps. But
I think that's exactly what they're looking for. This one you can dig in a bunch.
Okay, will do. Tell me to skip forward if I'm telling you too much. Okay, so after you hit step 1, it's going to create this layer file, but it's going to be empty. So this one remains Staley, and it'll call it centerline Staley. you'll go into Editor, Start Editing, and you want to click on Create Features. And you'll again select that layer, and we're going to draw a polyline. And so we'll just simply click down the line, down the valley. And again, we're not trying to follow any particular channel. We just want to know what the valley itself profiles like. And so this one we ran a little bit short, but you're just going to kind of real crudely go down the middle of the valley, and then we're also going to hit this one just a little bit so we have some context what it looks like. In the route ID, we want to name this again, and it can be whatever you want. It can be just simply number 1, 2, 3, whatever. And you'll save those edits and move into step 2. But before you open step 2, what you want to do is use the measure tool and just measure how wide you want your cross sections to be. So you'll measure from that center line, and if it's 300 meters or whatever it might be, go ahead and extend that another 50 meters or something, slap up onto the hillsides because we can always trim those cross sections down later. But we want to make sure that they're wide enough till we capture the entire valley floor. So we're going to put in, use the drop down, select our center line that we just drew, the name of it, because we can do multiple of these in one MXD. So that's why you're going to name them, so you can have several of them worked up all in one map. And then right here, it's simplified. We don't have different distances right and left now. You can just say 350 meters, and it'll do that both left and right. And then on the bottom step, you're just telling it where you want your stationing to start. Do you want 0 to start at the upstream extent, or 0 at the bottom, and it counts as it moves up valley? So either way you want to do it makes 0 difference. It'll still be the same result. So after you hit OK, it's going to generate valley spanning cross sections as wide as you told it you want them to be, and they'll be perpendicular to the center line that you drew. So if we work our way down here, you see where I bent my center line. Because they're perpendicular on the outside, we kind of have a little pie gap where there's not going to be any cross sections. And then similarly on the inside, we'll have a little bit of overlap. It's not a big deal. It's just kind of a visual thing. There's going to be some gaps right there. So after you're here, you go to step 3, which is really the one that takes the longest. It takes quite a bit of computational power right here. The computer's going to be analyzing every single one of those cross sections, which are drawn at 1 meter intervals down that entire profile. So it's doing a ton of analysis of all of those data points. And so after you run step 3, the tool is going to create this CSV file. It'll be labeled GGL, whatever name you said to call it, and then a CSV. And this will be stored in whatever file you told that you wanted all your stuff stored into in step 1. So you're going to want to open up that CSV file, and it will plot your bare earth LiDAR points, something like this. And most valleys look like this, and so this is an important point. A lot of people always ask, well, what's the steepest valley you've done this on? What are the valley slopes? And very, very rarely is there ever a linear valley slope from point A to point B. Almost all of them have this kind of catena shape, where it's steepest at the head, then you get this belly, and then it's a lower gradient run out through the rest of the valley. So knowing this shape is really what our REM and our whole design is based on. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to apply best fit trend lines to this. And what we're really looking for is we want to see a dotted line that's skimming across, your top of bank surfaces, your floodplain surfaces, if that's what you want to think of them as. And so for this particular example, this is a 7.5 kilometer long valley. My geomorphic controls down here at the confluence with the Middle Fork Willamette River. And then this is the math equation that describes this particular valley slope. And so using this math equation, and I don't even have to do this math anymore, the model's already going to generate this for you. You just have to select which equation best fits your valley. So again, mine's a third order polynomial. And so now I have a target association, a target elevation every meter down this entire valley. And again, I have valley spanning cross sections at those same 1 meter intervals. So now what the REM is going to do is basically compare every point within that cross section against, you know, the associated target elevation. And if our relative elevation map is going to be relative to this geomorphic grade line. And so just one caution on this, I've seen people do this a couple different ways, and you'll get really funky results. They'll want to do trend based on the current river's water surface or a bank full call, something like that. That really has zero relevance to the valley itself. What we're really looking for is the historic valley. So after you've looked at that, you can close that CSV file, and you're going to go to step 4. And again, name it whatever you want. This is where it's going to generate the relative elevation model map. So I'll probably call it Staley. And then right here, I would select third order polynomial. That's what fit my trend line best. And I didn't show you guys all the other alternatives, but you can walk through them, and you're just looking for really good agreement with the valley.
Just Paul, 1 second, and just to let folks know, don't worry about scrambling to write things down, because I'm recording this, so you can come back and get some of these details later too, because I just thought it occurred to me people might be trying to write all this down, but I'm recording it and I'll send that out afterwards. No, it's good.
I'll send you the presentation
so much,
if you like.
Perfect. Thank you.
No trouble. And if you need me to slow down or recover anything, please let me know. I'll back up. Also, I was going to mention here too, we have custom on here because this can be kind of an iterative thing. I'll show you in a minute. You'll take this map to the field and validate it. But if you need to change things, like sometimes we need to, because our geomorphic control has dropped and it's no longer what the historic one was, we need to generate a custom one to hit a new incised elevation. So we can definitely do that, create a new, you know, basically it's a valley slope. And then you just select custom here and then navigate to it in this column right here. All right, so then your final choice you have to make is how you want that information displayed. So it's automatically going to create a raster that's going to be in floating meters. And we use that for our cut and fill calculations later. But the one I personally like to use is I select this integer decimeters. And that just gives me the highest amount of resolution. And so if you guys aren't used to working in decimeters, it's 1/10 of a meter and about 4 inches. So that gives me, you know, pretty good resolution where I can see a lot of contrast in the valley. But if you like to work in feet, then go ahead and select that. It doesn't really matter. So when you hit OK, it's going to create this file right here, and it's going to come out in grayscale, which really doesn't show us much of anything new that we didn't already see. What we're going to do is open up the properties of that and just change some of the visuals. And so what I personally like to do, and you can do this, again, 1,000 different ways, whatever makes sense for you. If you click on classified or stretched, there's a bunch of different color ramps that you can select from, and just you're under a drop down and you can pick whatever you like. Personally, what I do is I go into classified, and I usually work with 10 classes, and then I'll click on this where it says classify. And then this is where I can clean up the rest of that, those cross sections that flopped up onto the hillside, and I don't need to see those anymore. I'll hit this exclusion button, and I'll say I don't need to see anything that's above 20. So that's anything over 20 or 2 meters above the GGL. Go ahead and trim that out, because that's going to be above the valley floor, and you can exclude it. So I'll hit OK. And then that leaves me with just values that are less than 20 to work through. And then what I usually do is I'll put breaks similar to what you see on this break values over here on the right. And so again, a -10 would be -1 meter. Hit OK, and then when you get to this cell, these are still going to be shown in grayscale, and then you can just click on them and change them to whatever color you like. And so again, this is just my default go-to, but I'm going to color -2 to 0 as baby blue, and that's an easy way to think of, that's what you expect to be wetted at base flow conditions. Stuff that's in the -0.5 to -0.2, I'm going to go with blue, and then anything deeper than that is going to really highlight incision. So I go with the pink colors there. And you can't quite see it here, but on the positive side, I go with 0 to +2, It's kind of a light green. That's where you might think of, you know, your sedges and emergent vegetation might be growing in those kind of environments. A little bit higher, the dark green, that's kind of where your willows and your cottonwoods and things are going to establish on those surfaces. And then if you look over here, you know, if we get above half a meter above, start getting into warmer colors, maybe that's where conifers are growing and so forth. So the warmer the color, the higher we are above the geomorphic grade line. I'll hit OK, and now that's my REM, what the valley looks like. And so again, what we have here is anything that's in baby blue is a perfect match for that geomorphic grade line that we did, that catena-shaped profile. And so we'll just look at this in a couple of different ways. I can also just say I only want to see things that are at 0. And so that's what I turned on here. Just everything that's an absolute perfect match, and showed me that in black. So you can show this, display these results in 1,000 different ways, whatever makes sense for you. This is one we use quite a lot just because it makes it easy to, you know, really quickly grasp what the valley is. And so again, if we were thinking about this valley in the classic sense of restoration, we'd be looking for a reference reach, right? Kind of a pattern profile dimension that could be repeated throughout the valley. Well, what this is showing us is, again, baby blue is just showing me everything that's a match for the geomorphic grade line. So that is our reference reach. This is what this valley was before it degraded. And then I'm also showing you what is degraded with the pink. So just simplifying it to show two different things: reference condition and what we'll restore it to, as well as its current degraded condition. And then just threw on the Slidell reference there again, because it is a perfect definition of what this valley had been. So your next step after you've done that is you're going to export this raster and make sure you go down here in advanced and select export as georeferenced information. So personally, I just use my cell phone. I have Avenza Maps on there, but if you use a GPS, you might want this as a TIFF, or whatever you like to use, but you can export this map and pull it up on your phone, something that has the ability to georeference while you're in the field. Load it up, and this is what it looks like on a tablet. So I'm walking around the project site, and in this particular example, I've colored everything that's a perfect match as black. But I can walk around the project site, and my blue dot on my screen shows me exactly where I'm at, so I can go evaluate all these surfaces and interpret them and see if this is showing me the correct things. So one of the first things I'll do is I'll go to a spot that shows as a perfect match for the geomorphic grade line. Scrape off the dust layer, and you see a really nice layer of alluvium. Very small stuff, and this is telling me this is my old riverbed. If I compare that against the substrate size in the current stream channel, there's a dramatic difference there, right? But I'm not just looking at the black zones, I'm also going to go to the greens and look at, you know, are there old cedar stumps there, or spruce, or things that kind of lived on that margin in the wetland zone. You're looking for all those different elevation bands to line up. Back to GIS, just wanted to show you guys a couple really easy things you can do if you're having a hard time visualizing what this means kind of as a raster and plan view. In 3D Analyst, you can also do cross sections. So here on the drop down, you just select this REM layer that we created, and then you can use this interpolate line tool. And so I'm going to click left and then double click here on the right, and you'll hit this profile graph button, and it will show us that cross section. And this time, instead of using absolute values like it would have from our Fair Earth LiDAR, it's showing us that same cross section as using the relative elevations. And so we have our 0 here. So again, that's going to be a perfect match for our geomorphic grade line. And you can see as we're moving from left to right, you know, we have a little depression that sits 4 inches low right there. But then we get to this channel here, you know, that's the water surface is 0.6 meters below our target elevation, and so forth. So that gives you, if you like to look at things in cross section, you can do 10 million cross sections and evaluate the valley that way. So really this gets us to our design map. This is pretty much what a design map looks like. We start, all we've done to that previous map that I showed you with the blue being the reference and the pink being the incision is then I've turned on everything that sits above. And I'm going to evaluate that as potential cut. And in this particular example, after the '64 flood, they came through this thing and ditched it, and then they would side cast that ditching material to block off flow paths like you can see right here. So these are our cut polygons. We're going to remove all of this material and use it as fill to fill in the pink channel. And then similarly right here, this is all side cast berm material that they're blocking off flow paths with. So our construction stakeout is really this simple. Again, we have our phone in hand, go to find the zero surfaces. We also have survey hubs set throughout the valley, so we can set our total station against them, or even just a laser level. We're really simply just going to paint the zero mark on surfaces, and then all the operators have this same map on their phone, and so they know that that's a cut polygon behind. So anything above this elevation, they'll cut down, and similarly in the foreground, anything below that, they will fill up to the same elevation, and that's pretty much done. Just a couple shots showing what it looks like once the alders are pulled off. And you can see, these are definitely side cast berm materials. And again, we're simply shoving this back into the incised river channel. Once that grading's done, we import our large wood from upslopes, and we'll spread it on the surface. So this is that same spot I was just showing you in the photo with the orange paint. So the levee was back here and has been removed. And then similarly, that ditched channel was right here in the foreground, and it's gone too. So again, that's as much as we do as far as earthwork. We're grading everything that we're going to disturb to the zero, and we don't create any channels ourselves. We just spread the wood and then turn the water back onto it and let it recreate itself from there. So here's what that same area looks like once it's been re-wetted. This is a different spot. This is in High Sierras in California. And I just want to show you a different example just for some of the nuance that I think is really exciting and fun to look at. So this is obviously a great big depositional valley and pretty straightforward. But there's two tributaries that are coming in, one from right up here. So we'll look at this one first, and then we'll jump down and look at this one real briefly. So if we look at this thing, and I apologize if you guys can't see this, but we have a little bit of a sinuous channel up here. And then as we get into this zone, we can see that it's clearly been manipulated, right? It's been ditched and it's very linear. And it's been pushed to the valley edge over here, very, very common. Then we see it takes a swing, crosses this road over in here, does a little zigzagging as it makes its way down, and again goes very linear. Looks like it's more highly incised down here, and then kind of disappears for a bit. The other thing to note is if you can see these stripes and very linear features that I've got my laser on. I'll show you what those are in just a second. And if I turn on my REM, this is what that same valley looks like. And so again, we can see, and I'm using the exact same color app as before, but this zone should be an enormous toe-to-toe valley spanning wetland complex, quite deep, up to 2 meters deep. But you can see as this place has been degraded and dewatered, then as things receded, they came through and cut ditches. They were trying to get deeper and deeper, trying to chase the water that had been lost. As we go down valley, we can see this huge hump right here. And so then you start to question, is this a natural feature? Is this artificial? How do I know? And I'll get into that in just a second. But as we come back down valley, you'll see that we start to getting into a bunch of surfaces that again match. But again, another really big, large wetland complex. So this isn't the REM for that spot, but I'm going to use the same one. That high ground that we saw in there is really a landslide. And you'll see this 1,000 times when you start looking at valleys. Sometimes it's going to be a landslide. A lot of times it'll be a smaller tributary confluence fan. But the basic thing that's happening is you're getting a larger scale driver with depositing a huge sediment wedge on your valley. So it's not a fluvial process of the valley we're looking at, but a higher order driver. But if we look at our valley profile, it will still continue to follow this geomorphic grain line. Water will normalize and follow exactly along these lines. Now, sometimes a landslide is big enough that it causes a break, and we'll have a different valley where this will accumulate, fill in, and then overtop this thing. But most of them don't. Most of them will do this thing where most of the water is going to sub underneath at base flow, meaning, and then reemerge on the backside of this deposit over here. So if we go back to that stream, and I found this forest GIS layers, and they labeled these as ditches. And it makes complete sense when we look at it from that context. So the early pioneers had water above, but there was zero surface expression through this whole zone during the summer. So they were ditching down, and you can see they put in many, many ditches trying to get to the water and convey it over to fields wherever they wanted to use it. Some other layers that were really cool is that you can see this springs icon over here. And again, they show a spring emerging out of that valley floor at the exact same location where we say, yeah, that's where water should be reemerging on the backside of this blockage within the valley. And then just one more thing to drive that home. This is fin-dependent vegetation. And so again, it's been occupying on those zones where we expect that water to be reemerging on the downstream side of that blockage. So these are things that you'd incorporate into your restoration design. So in a lot of projects, I see a lot of folks understand this general concept and they say, okay, yeah, wetlands here, wetlands there. But then what they'll want to do for connectivity for fish passage is construct a channel through this that links this thing up every single minute of every single day throughout the year. When in reality, that would be degrading this. What we should have is a blockage in this valley. We should have an isolated wetland up valley during base flow times. During higher flow seasons, you can see, yeah, it runs over the surface. But during summer, we want that to sub through here, reemerge as ice cold springs full of nutrient-rich water on the downstream side. That would be of much more ecological value than providing passage through this thing. So similarly for Yellow Creek, the tributary on a little bit to the south here, if we put our REM onto this map, we'll see some of those same kind of features. And these, again, are things you'll see repeated time and time again. Like this confluence fan, it's depositing a big yellow high ground right here. So it's more like a lag deposit, right? It's not a fluvial deposit of this system. Similarly, we have a slide right here and some higher ground. And then a really big wetland, so we should have a bunch of springs reemerging right here, and then a big wetland. And then as we move down valley, we'll notice a really big confluence fan, which is also going to be full of a bunch of lag deposits from Yellow Creek as it enters this bigger, broader depositional valley. And if we zoom in on that, are you guys able to see that? Yeah. We'll see the exact same kind of features again and again. You can see that someone absolutely came through here, cut a ditch, and channelized this thing to convey water at base flow season all the way down Yellow Creek. But again, what we should have is a lot of water starting to sub out beneath this feature. And if you look on this fan, you'll see, again, all of these Springbrook heads that should be activated and reemerging on the downstream side. So that tells us how we're going to design the restoration for this valley. Another thing I want to show you just on the incision, and you'll notice this quite often too as you do your analysis. When we're looking at these depositional valleys, they're typically going to be fine-grained, mostly made of silty loamy material on the surface and through most of the profile. And if we look at the depth of incision, black in this particular one is my greatest degree of incision. So those soft soils are very highly erosive. And Yellow Creek is cut down very deep into those. And if you contrast that with these kind of slide deposits, those are going to be larger, more coarse, less erodible, more like a lag deposit. And you can see the degree of incision is much, much less through here. And actually, what you do see appears to be quite artificial. You can see that someone has built a berm right there, tried to funnel on water, and then they've cut a ditch through this road crossing and put a culvert in right there. So again, just some of the features you'd be looking for in the landscape. What is also obvious in here is you can see that someone has excavated ponds and then spoiled the materials around here. There's several more down this way. But again, what we should have at base flow, we would want to plug that up, even though it's at target elevation, it matches our REM, it's an artificial feature. And we'd be better off having springs reemerge on this backside. And then just to zoom in so you can see some of those features. And with that, I think that's a quick run through the GGL REM tool. Does anyone have any questions or want to see some different stuff, more of the introduction stuff or some examples?
Yeah, I'll definitely let folks answer questions. And one thing I did want to ask you about was one of the UW students on this call are looking at prioritization at a landscape scale. And you said that you guys were also working on something similar. I didn't know if you had anything to share today, but that would also be helpful to the group.
Yeah, so we are definitely working on it, and it's not ready for prime time yet. But it's a very similar thing to this, but it's just kind of generically, instead of running every meter, which takes a tremendous amount of time for the computer to process all that data if you're working at a really big scale, it's kind of more looking at things, like a 10-meter DEM instead. So it's more coarse, but it's really just looking at broad unconfined valleys is what it boils down to. But nope.
Yeah, we'll have to talk when we're done and you're done, and we'll have a coming together of ideas, because it'd be great to learn from each other too. So does anyone have any requests or other things they would like Paul to cover, or specific questions?
I guess I had one question for you, Paul. I was curious, when you're looking at which areas to run the GGL tool, and you're kind of looking at which areas you think might have undergone incision, what do you think the best factors are to be looking for? Is it like changes in riparian vegetation, or is it, I think slope is obviously a big indicator just in terms of where that response valley is, but are there main factors that you would look for to kind of narrow down where to run the tool?
Yeah, that's a tough one to dive into without going into the background and history. So like you mentioned, slope is actually not one of the drivers. We've done this on valleys over 7% steep. It's exactly the same as something at 0.2%. It's really about valley type. But as far as determining where to look, and that, I think a lot of that just comes from a lot of time spent on ground. And you'll notice as you start walking more and more valleys, you'll see every single valley you walk in is undergone a lot of the same history of, exploit and remove, the large wood off of it, convert it for ag land and stuff like that. And so you just start to recognize a lot of those kind of same things. But to back up a step before that, before I run the REM tool, just in GIS, I see where I think the valley breaks are, and I'll just start with like 3D Analyst and profile the valley, and I'll extend above where I think it starts and extend below where I think it ends. And in that profile, you will see kind of a stair stepping of the slopes, and they'll be pretty well defined in that profile. So then I focus to looking at a valley scale in there. Probably didn't answer you very clearly, did I?
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
And Paul, I'll add to I know one other question we're looking at is causation, and trying to pull some GIS layers that we could maybe correlate with where we see incision. We off the top of our head thought of, road densities, land ownership, timber harvest. I don't know if you had any other ideas or had looked at sort of a causation, cause and effect, where you could somewhat correlate or look at relationships between land use and incision.
Yeah. Here, let me show you this one real quick, and I'll go through it super fast.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll recognize some things in here that are pretty familiar. just start with, the importance of these alluvial valleys. And this Hauer paper is really good for just showing, from the chemical and primary production all the way up to the apex predators, just that these are the apex of the landscape. So really cool paper. If you haven't read that one, grab it. But these slides are from Johan, the gentleman I introduced in the previous talk. So he put these cross sections together and you can see the bullets, but this kind of is a simple conceptual idea of what we think our depositional valleys look like prior to the Anthropocene. And kind of really the take home is that that last bullet, the maximum patch complexity. So we've got just a tremendous amount of diversity on the valley floor. And our water table's up at the valley floor surface. And again, the valley is the river. It's not any particular channel. So let's show the disturbance history. Usually started with the road coming up the valley floor, followed by the timber harvest. And then following that, in a lot of areas, it was the 64 flood, for example. Then the Army Corps came in and ditched everything. And so they would ditch, and then they would also sidecast that material to make a berm and isolate the river from the rest of the valley. Then that valley that's isolated from the river, we could convert it for use for whatever, whatever humans like to use these very rich valley floors for. But as a result of that, what we generally get is channel incision, because now we've focused all that stream power and we've converted this from a depositional environment to a transport environment. And so with that comes a lowering of the water table. And so like you're talking about with the vegetation, you'll see a transition from wetland obligate vegetation to now the upland species are moving down and occupying this valley floor. And then, of course, you see the coarsening of the substrates and all that good fun. And so our restoration history, when I started back in the 90s, we knew that these channels were degraded and they were not functioning at their historic capacity. But our efforts were really focused on making that channel a better ditch. And we were not restoring, back to this context where the whole valley is the river. And so we saw very limited ecological recovery from that. So really now what our stage zero approach is, quite simply, is taking these anthropogenic features like this berm and this valley road and using those to fill this feature, this ditch. And we'll spread wood on the valley surface, but really this is a done product. We get rid of those features and then turn the river back over to itself for creation. And so just a couple quick images of what that looks like. Phase one is kind of us playing the role of the glacier and getting it out of that ditch. So then it looks like this. So now we've restored water to the valley surface, which takes us to phase two, where now floods are a big driver of the landscape. They're bringing in lots of suspended sediments, and you can see all these deposits they're laying down, which then are very quickly colonized by those riparian-dependent vegetations. And then now this is a biology-driven landscape. The riparian plants, the beavers, even the macroinvertebrates are shaping what happens next in this environment. So that's kind of a real quick and dirty on the history. See if there's anything else in here you guys would like to see in regards to that. You want to just see a couple examples? I can show you some real quick. So we started on some of these small east side streams. And even though this isn't in size very much, this is whatever, 3 feet, you can see we only have that riparian vegetation right here in a very narrow band right adjacent to the water. You get above, maybe a foot above the water, and the soils are extremely dry. And you can see, we mainly have upland valley cheatgrass is kind of occupying the site, not cheatgrass, but upland vegetation is on this surface. So here's that exact same location 1 year later after we've basically just filled in the ditch. And you can see now we have wetland vegetation toe to toe again, channels all over the place. Same spot after 2 years. This is actually a really big fin up here where these folks are at now. And so really quickly you're transitioning from a transport channel and something that's really of very little ecological value to now a restored valley. And it's really quite simple. Another example where the stream had been ditched to the valley edge, and then an irrigation ditch ran on this north side, and they were irrigating this pasture with it. So here we cut this pasture down 4 feet to that target elevation and then used it as fill for this channel right here, which then turns into this. And then real quick, just the only graph I'll show you, but I think it's important to see. So here's our geomorphic grade line surface elevation. And this is we have a well at this location. And so discharge is shown in the orange here as we start in January and move into summer. Discharge is falling. And we see the same thing in our groundwater. Our depth to groundwater is basically echoing what we see in discharge, but it's falling until we get to this mid-August point when it all of a sudden rockets up to the surface, and it's stayed there ever since, even though discharge continued to fall later in the summer. So that's really what it's about. It's not just the surface water, but it's that alluvial aquifer too, the subsurface flow, bringing it back up into the surface where it supports riparian vegetation. So I'll get out of this presentation unless you guys want to see more examples from different environments. Yes.
Why don't we let folks ask questions about the tool, and then if we have some time, we can go back to examples, because I love seeing examples. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question. This is Alexa from Medhow Beaver Project. I am wondering, what do you think is the smallest scale project to tackle with stage 0 that, I mean, I kind of think it's worthwhile to do any of this restoration, but we're a pretty small organization with small tools. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
I don't think there's anything too small to be worthwhile. And again, I try to look at it from a valley scale context. And of course, you know, the more headwater we are, the higher we can start storing water in the landscape, the better. So some of our early ones were on things that were intermittent. And so now they've been restored to perennial after plugging up the ditch. But I think any scale that you work at is of value.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Do you guys want me to show some examples?
I guess I have a question if no one's going to ask one, and it's a bit of a tangent. This is Ryan Emarboy with the Salmon Board. I know there's been a push for these alluvial areas, you know, if you have restoration, to become storage and release water later for, you know, for increased stream flow in the summer. But it seems like when you have that area recolonized by riparian vegetation, that vegetation is going to start taking up more water. And I know that cottonwood, for example, uses a ton of water. So I'd be curious just about that question. How much do you think there's actually potential for this sort of restoration to actually augment downstream summer flow?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The riparian vegetation absolutely pumps a lot of water. But really what you're doing is kind of like this coronavirus, right? We're flattening the curve. And so the same amount of water is still going to move down valley. The watershed produces what it produces. We're just taking that huge spike off and then taking the trough off as well and kind of normalizing that. And I don't have any really good data to share with that other than anecdotal stuff like I mentioned, some of those early streams that we did that were intermittent pre-project, and they still are upstream of where we've done our work, but they no longer are through the project. They express surface water throughout the year now. So it must not all be taken up in evapotranspiration. Some is still flowing through. And I don't have much better than that to share with you.
Any other questions? Well, speak up if you think of one. And Paul, why don't you just keep rolling through the examples?
Okay. So
I do have a question. Sorry to trying to unmute myself. I'm wondering about your plans to try to start monitoring those changes in stream flow? Because we definitely get that question, the same thing with beaver dams and complexes in the uplands, that are we changing the amount of water available downstream, or are we just changing the timing of it? And the conversations to go with that with irrigators are looking at adapting to those changes with, you know, improved water residency time, or increased, that's not a judgment, an increased water residency time upland, whether irrigation protocols might need to change to match a change in water delivery, since you might have less in the high summer, but more in the late summer, early fall sort of thing. So just wanting to know if there are plans to do any more data-driven analysis of stream flow year to year on some of your projects.
Yeah, we're not. We should. You're right. It's one of those things that's kind of getting backburnered. More what we're looking at is on the peak flow analysis. So we are working like with the 2D and 3D modelers at Bureau of Reclamation out of Denver, the folks that actually write the models. And what they're wanting to do is reverse calculate their models that, you know, looking at the Q100 or the really big floods and what actually happens versus what's modeled. And so that's more where our focus has been, is on the reduction of amplitude of the floods. But yeah, we should dive into the base flow part of it as well. We just have not.
I know that's not easy. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah. While we're talking about monitoring, I will just mention too that the monitoring part of these is really difficult. None of the classic metrics have any value anymore, you know, width to depth, or, you know, you pool riffle sequencing or any of that kind of stuff. It's all more area driven and more about function and process rather than, you know, an easily identifiable widget kind of thing. So really a lot of stuff that we're looking at now is more based on water chemistry and primary production and food web mosaics and connectivity and those kind of things. So it's a different environment, totally.
Agreed. I think it's that balance between resource, you know, as a benefit to humans, and a service to ecological function, which is also a benefit to humans, but benefits many others. So I agree, we need some new metrics to really value that in a human resource type of way, even though it's not just for human benefit.
Yep. Any other questions on the tool? Something you want me to cover? All right. Well,
I'm going to ask one more question.
Go for it.
It's Alexa again. I'm wondering if you could share, or if Johan's willing to share, some of those illustrations that he put together. Those are really well done, and we are, you know, currently applying for grants, and it would be nice to not recreate wheels. If Johan's, I'm happy to attribute it to him, but would love to use some of those illustrations.
Yeah, I'll just email them to you or put them on a Google Drive or something so you guys can grab those.
Great, Paul. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you going over this, walking it through step by step, and hope I can utilize you as a resource in the future as well.
Yeah, no problem. People call pretty much every day when they get stuck on step 3 or whatever it might be. So happy to screen share with you and get you unstuck.
You're amazing. Thank you.
No trouble. All right, let's look at some pretty pictures then if there's no questions. So just show you some more stuff from the Coast Range. This is what Johan always refers to as a pasteurized stream. So you can't see 5 Mile Creek, but it's in a ditch over on the valley wall, and it's about 8 feet down. So this is a sand bed system, very, very low gradient. And it's been in this condition for over a century. And this is 98% non-native vegetation. So a lot of canary grass and a little bit of Himalayan blackberry. You can't really see it in this photo. So if we look at Janine and Colin's, you know, stream evolution triangle, this is very much in the lower right corner, kind of geology driven, right? The ditch controls the future of this landscape. Here's the exact same spot 1 year post. And the Coast Range has an amazing growing season, so these things are shooting up 8 feet at a shot. And here's Paul Burns, this is his project, and he's holding up that same pre-project photo. So now we're in the lower left corner, so hydrology is more of a primary driver in this landscape. Again, it's bringing in, every time it floods, just a tremendous amount of sediments, which will be deposited here and accelerate that vegetation recovery. Here's the same spot the next year. And so, you know, like you mentioned about the humidity, I mean, you can feel the humidity coming off this picture. I mean, this is just kind of that classic wetland now. And so if I turn the camera to my feet, you just see that kind of wetland bog all over the place. And this is very much now a biology-driven landscape. These things are shaping the future of the evolution of this landscape. And quite quickly, again, this is Johan, if you guys don't know him. The beavers are moving in and they're building, you know, dams all over the place. And so it's just an extremely rapid progression and transition in this landscape, full of coho now and cutthroat, lamprey, all that kind of stuff. Just for an exotic one, this is, yeah.
Paul, I have a question real quick before you move past that one. In the first year transition plan picture,
yeah,
if you wouldn't mind going back to that, were any of those larger willows or riparian veg planted? I see the planted ones in the foreground, but did all of that spring back of its own doing, the taller ones?
Yeah, so those were all stakes just stuck in the ground, and yeah.
But what about the ones behind, the taller veg behind?
Yep, same thing.
Wow.
So they literally are getting 8 feet of growth each season. Place goes nuts. These were just plugged in the ground probably a week before or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's not fair. Their growing season is nuts. So this is the most exotic environment we've worked in so far. This is the National Trust's office in southwest England. So a nice 16th century water wheel feature, but their disturbance is the exact same thing we just went through in the cartoons. So that this just happened, you know, 2,500 years ago instead of 100 years ago. So they did their first project here in September. And again, just filling up the ditch. It's that simple. So they filled up this ditch and then this one that comes down the valley here. But what's really cool there is just how quickly folks embraced this here. So just a couple headlines from the Times out of London and then the Guardian. But they're really looking at this as a way to curb the impacts of climate change. And they're all about it. So we were supposed to be going back next month to look at 5 more, but coronavirus has shut us down. The biggest system we've worked on so far is the South Fork of Mackenzie River. So, you know, speaking to stream power and slope, you can see the degree of disconnect and highly channelized, highly simplified, very much just riffle dominated. Base flow is about 400 CFS, just for some scale. And then we've done 2 phases so far. Phase 1 is down here at the confluence with Mainston Mackenzie. And for scale, our valley is about a mile wide right here. Just did phase 2 last summer, and then we'll do this phase next. But you can see it, this says base flow, but this is all flows. We're confined to these same dark blue channels, whereas base flow now occupies those, plus what you see in the baby blue. And I'll show you some pictures from right here, just for scale again. This is the river after we dewatered it, and we're running the system through the forest while we regrade this. But you can see the people down here for some scale. Very much a boulder garden ditch. There's our geomorphic grade line, so we had to fill this river channel 14 feet to bring it up to target. So here's that exact same spot after the river's been filled and we return the water. So here's Nick standing on these trees just for scale again. And then there's this whole network of all these relic channels, which are a perfect match to the geomorphic grade line. We bring the water back up and then those are all flowing again and just really beautiful habitats. What was super cool on this project is the spring Chinook. So in the phase 1 portion, over a 60-year period of doing red surveys, there had only been 2 Chinook reds in that boulder garden. over that period. So this is like 3 weeks after we demobbed the machines. We had 14 reds right on top of where we just were, which was the second highest count in the entire Mackenzie Basin. So we were totally elated. We did phase 2 immediately upstream, that next segment, and we were all excited. We're like, we're going to get 50 reds this year. Well, we did not get 50 reds. We got 241 reds. The Chinook are absolutely voting with their tails. They love this place. But not just them. Again, we're getting a tremendous amount of suspended sediments deposited. And now you can do the old scoop your hands in the silts and they're just full of the lamprey on the seats, which is really fun. And then if we look at fish production, this is just 1 year post and it's just one survey, but all the projects we do show very similar results. So we have 5.5 times more density within a square meter of water, but we also have so many more square meters of water that results in 30 times more fish within the same valley than we had in the pre-project condition. And then real similar to the work Jacob Katz is doing down in Sacramento River. If you guys haven't seen this stuff, what he's doing is he's taking juvenile Chinook smolts, and they're all exactly the same size. They're from the hatchery. They're exactly the same size. He puts them in rearing pens, some in the river, and then he calls it a floodplain, but it's basically a flooded rice field. And after 3 weeks, this is the difference in the size of the fish. These ones were reared in the river net pens, these ones in the flooded rice fields, and that's after 3 weeks. And the reason is that these guys are feeding on the zooplankton and stuff, right? And so you can see how much is in the water column in the river as it compared to out on those inundated valleys. And that's really how you grow a lot of, not just fish, the entire food web begins there. And then just want to show you guys the energy part. So someone asked about slope. So this is in the phase 3 piece. Oh, hell, I took the video out. I can show you the video if you like. This is phase 3. This is at about 4,000 CFS, and it's just an absolute torrent. You can't step a foot in there without being swept away. Versus you go in the lower phases, this is over double the slope of this. Now, I don't think there's a restoration practitioner in the world that would say, clearly the way to reduce the power in this thing is to double its slope. But that's what that is. So the entire valley is underwater. Most of it's moving less than a foot per second. Just, again, a very low energy environment, and that's why it's depositing all those nutrients and sediments and retains the water longer. So that's the end of that one. Now do you have some questions?
We'll take any final questions and then we'll let you go, Paul. Anyone have any final questions?
I just want to say it's super cool. Thank you so much, Paul. I can't wait to see these things evolve over time and
no trouble.
Yeah, photos.
And if you guys ever do want to, I mean, we're always doing tours, or if you want to come see them, let us know. Come on down. And pictures do not do them justice at all. It's more fun to throw on a dry suit or whatever and just go wandering.
I definitely hope to plan that this summer. I think that'd be great. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate that. Like I said, I recorded this and I'll put it up and send it out for folks that want to see, especially some of the details related to how to use the GIS tool. And I really appreciate your help. We still are trying to get some projects going in this Upper Columbia area and in state of Washington. So we'll just keep continuing the dialogue and hopefully get some projects.
Yeah, it can be hard to step off that cliff, and, but once you do, it won't be nearly as scary. Folks will come along.
Yep, agreed. Well, thanks everyone for participating, and reach out if you have any other sort of thoughts or ideas about other things we might need to keep this conversation going. I know the permitting workshop is also on our list to try to get some of the permitters from Oregon up to Washington to kind of meet with our permitters and talk about how to make this work up here. So that's on our list, and then hopefully a tour, and just keep engaging these guys. So thank you so much, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.